Hello and welcome back to Bicyclelegs Talks Music and another edition of anniversary albums. Today we're going to be looking at albums that are having a significant anniversary in the month of February 2025. For those of you who are new to the series, when I say significant anniversary, I mean one that ends in a 5 or a 0, so 50th, 35th, 20th, that sort of thing. You'll get the hang of it as we go along. As always, I've picked 10 albums out from a larger list. Please do let me know in the comments which ones you think I should have included. And let's get straight into it and talk about our first album, which is having its 55th anniversary in the month of February. It was originally released on the 9th of February 1970, and that is Burnt Weenie Sandwich by the Mothers of Invention. Love that back colour too. It's like very, very strange. Him saying, "God, this is a tasty little sucker." Now, this is the first of a couple of Mothers of Invention albums that would come out in 1970. It's sort of the last albums by the original Mothers of Invention. They were basically various songs that hadn't made it onto other albums that had been recorded over the last sort of 3 years or so. And after this one, and then later in the year, you would get Weasels Rip My Flesh, which I'll probably be talking about when we get to that particular month when we do our anniversary albums. And then Frank Zappa would go on and create a completely different Mothers of Invention and go on to do completely different things. But this album, it collects some really, really good tracks. There's a couple of cover versions, which is unusual for Frank Zappa. You've got WPLJ and Valerie, but you've also got, on side one, you've got like Igor's Boogie Phase 1 and Phase 2. You've got the Overture to Holiday in Berlin, and then later on you've got Holiday in Berlin Full Blown. You get the theme from Burnt Weenie Sandwich. You get ABC, which is spelt quite weird, but yes. But for me, the centerpiece of the album is the almost side-long Little House I Used to Live In. One of Zappa's great compositions. You know, everybody thinks of Frank Zappa as a guitar player, as a singer, as a comedian. You know, he always thought of himself as a composer first and foremost. And, you know, pieces like this are why I think he should be taken very seriously as a composer. It's just a wonderful, wonderful piece of music. So, yeah, I mean, it's a great album, even though it is sort of, you know, things that didn't quite make it onto other albums and that sort of thing. I think it stands up in its own right as a really, really good album. We might be having an album coming up a little later that's a bit like that, with songs that were recorded for earlier things and not used. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself there. The next album we're going to have a look at is having its 40th anniversary in the month of February. It was originally released on the 11th of February 1985, and that is Nighttime by Killing Joke. Great album. I mean, if anything, you know, their post-punk roots, I think, are getting smoothed off a little bit here. You've got Chris Kimsey is the producer, and he's known for, you know, very polished productions and that sort of thing, but I don't think it completely takes the edge off Killing Joke. I think it makes them more accessible, which I think is a good thing. You know, this album has the end track is the one that everybody knows on this album, which is a song called 80s. You know, it was a single in its own right. You can see the video on YouTube, but it also has a riff that's very, very reminiscent of a Nirvana song to come, which is, you know, Come As You Are. But the rest of this album is really, really good too. You know, songs like Nighttime, Darkness Before Dawn, Love Like Blood, Kings and Queens is great. Tabazan, Multitudes, Europe. And as I say, it closes out with 80s. Wonderful album top to bottom. Some people would say it's the best Killing Joke album. I don't know. It's definitely right up there for me. But yeah, terrific album. The next album we're going to have a look at is having its 55th anniversary in the month of February. It was released on the 13th of February 1970, and it must be one of the most iconic debut albums of all time. I think you know what I'm talking about. I am, of course, talking about the self-titled debut by Black Sabbath. What an incredible album. There's not many debut albums. There's not many albums, period, let alone debut albums, that could potentially claim to have invented a whole genre of music. A lot of people will tell you this is the first heavy metal album. I don't know if people like Martin Popov, who are really studied in the matter, would necessarily agree with that. But a lot of people would argue that. And it's certainly one of the very first metal albums. You know, there's still some of their blues roots from when they were a blues band called Earth. You get the cover version, Evil Woman, Don't Play Your Games With Me, which definitely has that bluesy vibe to it. But I mean, it's also got that just wonderfully sinister title track. And that riff, you know, dong, dong, dong. Just absolutely wonderful. And the creepiest, you know, hammer horror lyrics that go with it. Just absolutely fabulous. You get the Wizard, Behind the Wall of Sleep. You've got NIB, which is great. Sleeping Village and Warning. I mean, I think they would go on to even better things with the next couple of 3 albums. But this is an incredible start. And as I say, there really wasn't much like this at all around in February of 1970 in particular. The next album we're going to have a look at could not be more different from Black Sabbath's debut album. It's an album that's having its 20th anniversary in the month of February. It was originally released on the 15th of February 2005, and it is Here Come the ABCs by They Might Be Giants. They Might Be Giants are one of my favourite bands of all time, and they did do a number of kids albums. This was actually their second kids album, but it was their first kids album on a theme. They did it for Disney. They would end up doing Here Come the 1, 2, 3s and Here Comes Science after this as well. Now, the lyrics are obviously, you know, meant for kids, and on this album in particular, for pretty young kids. You know, my son was not even 4 years old when this album came out, and I used to play the DVD for him. You know, it has... all these albums have a DVD with the CD that, you know, has videos for every song and, you know, mostly animated ones and that sort of thing. And they're just wonderful, charming things for kids. But this musically is not the sort of thing that's going to drive the parents up the wall with the repetitiveness and tinkly sort of, you know, kids music, you know, the stereotypical kids music. This musically could be on any of their adult albums, you know. Sure, the lyrics are about, you know, letters of the alphabet and all that sort of thing, but musically it's really great. I won't go through all the songs because there's 25 of them on this album, but I mean, some of the highlights are things like The Alphabet of Nations, E Eats Everything, the rather psychedelic pictures of pandas painting, Fake Believe, there's 2 versions of that on the album. Can You Find It is musically lovely. Alphabet Lost and Found, it's really, really good. Sears for Conifers is probably my favourite song on the album, not just because I think musically it's wonderful. I love the fact that they're introducing these, you know, sort of preschoolers to a word like conifers. I don't know, that tickles me for some reason. I love these kids' albums, you know, maybe not quite as much as some of the adult albums, but I think the kids' albums that They Might Be Giants have done are absolutely great. I still buy them. I still love them when they put one out. So they've done 5 all up kids albums, and I think they're all really worth having. So yeah. The next album we're going to have a look at is having its 35th anniversary in the month of February. It was originally released on the 20th of February 1990. You'll have to excuse me, I only have this one on CD, but it is Dark at the End of the Tunnel by Oingo Boingo. Now, I've done an Oingo Boingo studio albums ranked with the wonderful Steve Schnee. I will leave a link to that in the description. This album, I don't think it ranked particularly highly on either of our lists, but I think if you ask both me and Steve, we'll still tell you this is a really good album. they're getting a little more streamlined with this one. It's a little less quirky, it's a little less oddball. But those Oingo Boingo characteristics are still definitely in here. Still definitely got that Oingo Boingo flavour. Just a little more streamlined, a little more polished. But I mean, When the Lights Go Out is an absolutely cracking opening track. Skin is great. Out of Control was the single on the album, and it's a lovely song. Glory Be, Long Breakdown is a really, really good song. One of my favourites on the album. Runaway, the Escape song. Flesh and Blood, great song too. Try to Believe is a great album closer. Dream Somehow is this. Yeah, it's a really good album. Maybe not top tier Oingo Boingo, but the worst thing that Oingo Boingo ever did is still better than some of the other bands' best works. In my humble opinion, I love Oingo Boingo. The next album we're going to have a look at is another debut album. It's having its 45th anniversary in the month of February. It was originally released on the 22nd of February 1980, and it is the self-titled debut by Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark. Very early synth pop. This is, it's tuneful and it's definitely got some pop elements, but it's still experimental. It's still got that sort of Kraftwerk vibe that the early Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark would have. They have a re-recording of their very first single on this album, which is the song Electricity. But it starts off with Bunker Soldiers, a song like Almost and Mr. Reality is really, really great. The Messerschmitt Twins, Messages. I love that song. Really, really love that song. Julia's song, Red Frame, White Light. Always have trouble pronouncing that. It's about a phone box that they used to use to like contact record companies and music venues and that sort of thing to get work. That sort of thing. Dancing and Pretending to See the Future closes the album out. It's a really, really good early album. It's definitely sort of more minimalist than some of their later work would be. Well worth seeking out though. I really, really love this album. The next album we're going to have a look at is one I was alluding to when I was talking about the Mother's Burnt Weenie Sandwich album, in that it's an album of, I don't want to say offcuts, but it's like songs that weren't used on previous albums that had been recorded over the previous few years. It is considered by a lot of people to be this band's very, very best album. It would be either number 1 or number 2 for me. I am, of course, talking about Presence by Led Zeppelin, with that wonderful die-cut sleeve, and it has, I won't take them all out, but like there's all different ones on both of the inner sleeves and that sort of thing. Just really, really wonderful. And I mean, you've got the wonderful Custard Pie on here. The Rover is great. In My Time of Dying. You've got the title track, not from this album, but from the last album, Houses of the Holy. Why that didn't make it onto Houses of the Holy, I don't know. Maybe it wasn't quite finished. You got Trampled Underfoot. You've got Kashmir. I mean, one of the all-time classic Led Zeppelin songs, isn't it? You've got the wonderful In the Light. You've got Bron E.R. I never know how to pronounce that. Down by the Seaside, 10 Years Gone is great. Night Flight, the Wanton song. You've got Boogie with Stu, where they've got Ian Stewart, who was sort of the 6th Rolling Stone, playing piano on it. Black Country Woman and Sick Again to close the album out. Terrific. It's one of the all-time great double albums, I think. And, it's from Houses of the Holy onwards. That's sort of my sweet spot with Led Zeppelin. It's the later stuff is what I really, really get into. I mean, the first 4 albums are wonderful too, don't get me wrong. They have their moments. But it's from sort of Houses of the Holy, Physical Graffiti, In Through the Outdoor, which I've done an episode on with Tom Curlis. I'll leave a link to that in the description if you haven't already seen that one. Those are the sort of Led Zeppelin albums that I tend to reach for more than anything else. The next album we're going to have a look at is having its 40th anniversary in the month of February. It was originally released on the 25th of February 1985. Probably the best known album by this band, certainly the best selling album by this band, and absolutely brilliant album that it is. I am of course talking about Songs from the Big Chair by Tears for Fears. I've done a Tears for Fears studio albums ranked with the wonderful John the MusicNut. I will leave a link to that in the description. Please do check that out if you haven't already. I mean, this album's got, you know, two of their most well-known hits with Shout and Everybody Wants to Rule the World. Both classic songs. But you've also got The Working Hour, which is probably my favourite song on the album. It's just so dark and atmospheric, and it's got all these wonderful layers to it. Mother's Talk is a bit more chaotic, but it's also got all these really great layers going to it. I don't own the surround sound mix of this album. I must rectify that at some stage, because I bet this album sounds incredible in surround sound, especially as it was Steven Wilson who mixed it into surround sound. I mean, side two's got I Believe, which is a beautiful soulful ballad. You get Broken, which is great. Head Over Heels was another hit single for them off this album. I love that song. You get a little reprise of Broken after that. And then you get this really sort of atmospheric song called Listen. It's mostly instrumental. You know, there's only a couple of sung lyrics, and then there's sort of like wordless vocals sort of chanting at the end of it. It's a really sort of eerie way to end the album. It's, you know, just really wonderful. But if you only know sort of Shout and Everybody Wants to Rule the World, go and check this album out. It will not disappoint. The rest of the album I think you'll find is every bit as good as those two big hit singles. Speaking of Steven Wilson, the next album we're going to have a look at is the youngest album we're looking at today. It's having its 10th anniversary in the month of February. It was originally released on the 27th of February 2015, and that is Hand Cannot Erase by Steven Wilson. Now this followed up The Raven That Refused to Sing, and as Steven Wilson is wont to do, he would often he would vary what he was doing musically from album to album. The Raven That Refused to Sing was an absolute love letter to 70s progressive rock. This definitely moves in a more modern sound. It's still progressive, but it's definitely got a more, 2015 sound to it than The Raven That Refused to Sing. It's a concept album. It's sort of about the idea of sort of disappearing in plain sight, as it were, of being there but nobody noticing that you're there. It was based on a story about a woman who went missing for 3 years and nobody noticed. And unfortunately, they ended up finding her dead in her flat. This doesn't take that part of the story about the sort of the dead part, but it takes the idea that someone can be here but not be here, if you know what I mean. It starts off with First Regret, which is a short sort of introductory piece. Then you get the wonderful sort of 3 Years Older, which is just over 10 minutes long. Really great song. The title track is really good. It's kind of up-tempo. Then you get Perfect Life and Routine on side 2 of the vinyl. Routine's 9 minutes long. It's really one of the best tracks on the album. You get Home Invasion on side 3, which he would use that song as the title for one of his live DVDs and albums. Regret number 9, Transients. Then you get the epic track on the album, 13.5 minutes, Ancestral. Just absolutely wonderful album, wonderful song, sorry. Happy Returns is great, and then Ascendant Huron is kind of this coda at the end of the album, which really sort of wraps things up and yeah. But it's a wonderful album from top to bottom. As I say, it's still progressive, it's still very complex, but at the same time it's also a little more accessible. I don't know quite how he pulls that off, of sort of the complexity and the accessibility in the same album. but he does it really, really well. This is a lot of people's favorite Steven Wilson album. I don't know quite where it comes for me, probably definitely in the top 3. I will be doing a Steven Wilson studio albums rank sometime soon, so keep an eye out for that. And then the last album we're going to have a look at is having its 50th anniversary in the month of February. It was originally released on the 28th of February 1975, and that is Welcome to My Nightmare by Alice Cooper. Now, of course, this is the first Alice Cooper album where it's Alice the singer rather than Alice the band. The band had kind of wound up by this stage. Alice the singer had decided to make solo records. He was still using the name Alice Cooper. He still had Bob Ezrin in tow. He brings in Dick Wagner, who becomes one of his most important sort of musical collaborators. You know, you've got other great musicians on here like Tony Levin as well. But I mean, you've got the, you know, classic tracks on here like Welcome to My Nightmare and Department of Youth, which open side 1 and side 2 respectively. You know, absolutely great songs. But on side 1 you've also got Devil's Food, The Black Widow, which has this wonderful narration by Vincent Price. Almost 10 years before he would do it with Michael Jackson on Thriller. Some Folks is great. Only Women Bleed, you know, was the big hit single off here, and would kind of point the way to where Alice would go with a lot of his singles anyway, with those sort of ballads and that sort of thing. He would have quite a bit of success with that for a few years. Side 2, you've got Cold Ethel, which is, you know, just a great song. 3 years ago, the incredibly creepy and brilliant Steven. Ah, what a wonderful, wonderful song that is. The Awakening, and then Escape to close the album out. Ah, this is a classic album. You know, Alice Cooper group or Alice Cooper solo, this one's definitely right up there with my absolute favourite Alice Cooper. So there you have it, everyone. Those are my anniversary albums for the month of February 2025. Please do let me know in the comments which albums of these you like, which ones maybe you don't care for so much, and please do let me know which albums you think I should have included but I didn't, because sometimes they're albums that were in my longer list and sometimes they're things that I didn't even think of. I love it when you come up with those because they make me go out and listen to them. Please do like, share and subscribe. It really does help the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. I have everything playlisted, so if you want to see some of my other anniversary album shows, I have a playlist for those. If you want to see some of my studio albums ranked shows, I have a playlist for those. And if you want to see my appearances on other people's channels, I also have a playlist for those. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at bicyclelegs on Instagram, Twitter, and a bunch of other places. I also have a dedicated bicyclelegs Facebook page. Links are all in the doobly-doo. Please do give those all a follow and join in the conversation. I'd really love to have you there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.